Welcome to this episode of Your Places or Mine with me, John Goodall, the architectural editor of Country Life.
And me, Clive Aslett, visiting professor at Cambridge.
Well, Clive, today you're going to be taking us through one of the most exciting and important of London's shopping streets, the history of Regent Street and John Nash and Prince Regent.
Yes, I love going to Regent Street when there's nobody in it. So that's my but I do love it. I love it. It is the most. I've always loved this part of London, and it has fired my imagination since reading the wonderful book by George Summerson on George and London, which was published, I think, originally in 1945 and has never been surpassed. And it is so lucid and sharp. And
it opens, doesn't it, with a beautiful description of somebody. He imagined somebody going up in an air balloon and watching London develop in sort of speeded up time, and how great
so good
swathes of development open out in different directions.
Yes, it's like one of those speeded up films.
It's a really evocative image, isn't it?
And you see, the writing is so brilliant, but his mind is also so sharp. So, I mean, it is just brilliant. But he says about Regent Street that it is, and he says this in 1945, and he might have thought of things after the war. But anyway, he says it's the only attempt in London to comprehensively, to introduce a plan that comprehensively changes the whole thing.
Yeah, so
I mean, I'm surprised that he doesn't think that some of the efforts after the Second World War, which would have been, and he would have known about them, which would have been on the tapis by 1945, the Abercrombie Plan and so on. But anyway, what he says, but of course, London had by that stage become so much bigger.
Yes, but it's interesting that he frames it in that way. I mean, looking over the ruins of bombed London and seeing it as this crucial development. Perhaps we should explain, for those maybe not so familiar with London, roughly where it is within the city.
Yes, it's in the West End, and it is an extraordinary development which runs from Regents Park, which goes a long way north. It then runs down to Oxford Street, becomes Regent Street, which then goes down all the way to Piccadilly Circus, and it goes on and on, Lower Regent Street, etc.
I have to tease you by saying
it stops in St James's Park.
If you didn't know London, you wouldn't know what you were describing at all, would you?
Well, that is perfectly true. How should we locate it?
If you have the city,
it's in the middle of London.
It's in the city on the north side of London, don't you? And you have Westminster further down on the Thames. It's sort of striking. And if the Thames you imagined runs east-west, then Regent Street is running right up north from Westminster, really, isn't it? It's actually, oddly, it's not connected with the city. It's actually part of this, what you describe as the West End, the western side of the city. It's a line running north from the river, not the river. From maybe you're just confusing everyone. Just look at the map.
No, you're quite right. You're absolutely right on. And there are one or two key things about the topography before Regent Street, or this whole development, because it's not really just Regent Street. I mean, Regent Street is the centre part of it, but as I said, Regents Park, which is very, very big at the north, and what there is at the south, of what existed before. And one of the things was that the then Prince Regent had a palace called Carlton House. And that actually was demolished by the time this whole thing had been finished. It had been demolished, which is why it sort of ends at St James's Park. It actually was intended to end at Carlton House. Which was developed into something else.
It becomes a square, basically, with clubs at the end of the Mall.
But it's interesting that it starts in a park, Regent's Park, and it ends in a park. St James's Park, because the whole essence of this was it was a picturesque development. It wasn't like Paris, which is classical and where everything is straight lines and geometry and ending in great vista, some sort of eye catcher at the end of a long boulevard.
It's actually the shape.
This wiggles.
The shape of the street is is one of the most surprising things about it, indeed, isn't it? Because in fact, a great part of it is a curve.
Yes.
Isn't it, at the upper level? And I suppose fundamentally the idea is that you're creating a new garden suburb north of London in what is then more or less countryside, and allowing people then to travel through this part of the city. In fact, between the area of Soho, which is presumably a prosperous but crowded streets, and the West End, which is where all the aristocratic palaces have been developed, and it's part of the street is straight, but then it curves down, linking a park at the north, which is encircled by new houses.
Yes,
with the heart, as you say, Carlton House at the very bottom.
And it was enormous. It was an enormous undertaking. But I think it's also brilliant, and it's brilliant in a particular way, which was that Nash, who was the architect, John Nash, he was able to find a way of doing it with great ingenuity. And, well, we'll discuss the origins in the open land that there was, which Regents Park was created from, in a moment. But you mentioned Soho. Soho is to one side of Regent Street. And that was, there are smart bits, or rather at that time there were smart bits. There's a lot, obviously, but the smart bits of Soho, but there were also some very unsmart bits. And that land was cheap. The land on the other side was not cheap. And part of Nash's genius was that he saw that he could buy up these bits of sort of poor land in Soho and turn them into something different. So it was a fantastic speculation, because this land was purchased and then rose in value. And he was able to create this street, because it just simply wouldn't have been profitable to have done it.
Or possible
in the expensive parts.
So, can you just explain a little bit? And we want to hear, obviously, a little bit about Nash and also the Prince Regent. But can you explain, where the idea comes from? Is it Nash's own initiative that creates this major development?
Well, the land to the north was owned by something called the Office of Woods and Forests. It's what owned what we would now call the Crown Estate.
Yes.
The land owned by the Crown. And this was, huge estates that had come down from the medieval period, really, and they were still owned by the king. And it included Marylebone Park, I think it was called, and that was a big hunting forest. It was like hunting park. It was as St. James's Park had been. These often existed for hunting. And they had formed the idea that this land should be developed. So I think that was what gave the whole thing the kind of boost. About 1806, this was during the Napoleonic Wars, when, few people, it was not such a great time for town planning because there was it was difficult to get the materials, I think, to build. So this was itself quite a bold notion. But Regent Street is intersected by Oxford Street, which goes east-west, and that's a very old and important route, which leads all the way ultimately. It's Roman road, which leads ultimately all the way to Wales. It's the very same road as the A40.
It is, and so I feel we do have to come back slightly to the plan of London, though, because you do need to understand, if you're listening, that you've got the city with this Roman road running out west from it from Newgate, and that runs out west towards Oxford. But then you get further south you get the Mall, which is a 17th century route, which is parallel to that, which obviously has. By this date, Carlton House Terrace at the bottom, and basically Oxford Street is running at Regent Street is running at right angles to those and connecting the two through what had really been a forest of streets before, and then running beyond them to the park. So it is an artery that takes you from right outside the north of London right to the very centre and effectively to the junction of Westminster. Oh, and also the Strand and the Mall.
But I think what we have to remember is that at the time there's very little development north of Oxford Street, which was the key point, because the Office of Woods and Forests wanted to develop this land that they had, but who knows was going to go there, because it was disconnected from the rest of London. So the purpose of this street was to make it more attractive to the people who were going to have, the new houses that were proposed for Regent Street and its surroundings.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. It's a sort of virgin site, and it's creating a new area of development. I mean, London's developed north of the city, but it hasn't developed north of Westminster and the West End. So it's creating a whole new suburb. But it is conceived from the start, isn't it, as being a combination of smart residential buildings, but also commercial buildings, isn't it? Maybe we'll come on to that in a moment.
Yes, well, that's true. But I suppose I suppose we're more aware of the Regent Street is now a commercial street, obviously, but all Nash's buildings have disappeared from Regent Street. Yes. But a lot of his domestic buildings survive. But I think that if you think of the sheer quantity of the domestic architecture around Regent's Park, there's an awful lot. And it's also totally new, really, in anywhere. I mean, he had such an original imagination. He was an extraordinary man.
And Regent's Park, of course, for those who don't know, is basically designed as a circular space with these rides that run two concentric rides, which is itself a very unusual.
Well, it was unusual, and the really extraordinary thing was that scattered throughout Regent's Park were going to be a whole lot of villas. I mean, a lot. I think there were about, around about 60. So it was going to be like a very grand, what we would now call a garden suburb. But of course, that was a completely new concept. Actually, that wasn't how it was developed. There were only 8 villas built in there. The Prince Regent was going to have one, and he called it a ganguette. It was a sort of pleasure dome, because he had his palace at the other end of the development, but he was also going to have this sort of, he loved building, he loved decorating and everything. So he was going to have his party place in Regent's Park. Well, those things never happened, but the concept was extraordinary. We must say something about Nash, I think.
Yes.
Because this rather explains, I mean, his prehistory rather explains the whole thing, and it's very mysterious and fun.
So I'll tell
it in a mysterious and fun way if I can.
Who is John Nash? Where does he come from, and his connection with the Prince Regent?
This is his connection with the Prince Regent is something which we can discuss, and that is slightly mysterious and intriguing. And John Summerson clearly believed there was scandal at the heart of it. Of some kind. But Nash was really an extraordinary man. He was the son, I think, of a wheelwright in Lambeth, I think. It's the most likely thing. He became apprenticed to an architect, Robert Taylor. He got a bit of a legacy, and he set up as a builder, and he could build houses as speculations. As very often happens with such characters, he went bankrupt. He had by then married a wife who was the daughter of a lawyer, and who had a bit of property. So, I mean, he was sort of moving up, but she proved to be a total disaster because she was extremely spendthrift and had huge debts, and I think was altogether a lot of trouble because he had to send her away to a cousin in Wales to reform herself. And I think, Summerson, and I don't know whether this is true, but he strongly implies that Nash could not be what you might call a conventional husband. I mean, presumably what he's saying is that he was impotent, or I don't think he meant that he was gay. Or he might have done, but I thought he would have said. But strange too that it's rather sort of prudish that somebody in 1940 wouldn't explain what he meant. But he implies that he was not a sort of 100% fully functioning husband. And anyway, this first wife was pretty rackety. I think possibly Nash himself was. So off she went to Wales. He went bust, and then he went to sort of recoup his own forces and fortunes in Wales. And he was quite a hit. He was quite a hit with the gentry because he was a great fun. I think he drank a lot, and he also hunted. So he fitted in really well to his county society because that's just Regency society because that's just what they were all doing. So he got a lot of work in Wales. At that point, he designed in very charming sort of classical style. These rather modest, they're Welsh, you see, so they were rather modest houses, modest classical houses, but he found a language for them which made them look very attractive. And he built one or two public buildings and things as well. But the key thing, I think, was that in Wales, he met Sir Uverdale Price.
Yes, that's
a name to conjure with, who was a writer and an aesthete, and he wrote a lot about the picturesque. This was intensely important in the late 18th century, to late 18th century gentle. I can say gentlemen. I think we can say gentlemen because it was a sort of male thing. These were the landowners. And how you arranged your landscape park around your house was a matter of intense debate.
And the picturesque literally means as in a picture, and this idea that you need a foreground, a middle ground, and distance, and a focus for the views that you have. I mean, it's I think it's a very 21st century aesthetic because we go around all the time with our mobile phones.
Yes, that's true. Yes, and, they would have loved that. Of course, they had a clawed glass, didn't they? I mean, the equivalent. They had a special kind of, it was a bit like a telescope, but it was sort of tinted in a brown colour. And so you could look through the landscape as though it were
a sepia watercolour.
Yes, or a painting where the varnish has gone all brown. Well, it might have been a sepia watercolour. But anyway, that's how they like to look at it. As though they were trying to recreate these paintings, particularly with reference to what they had seen in Italy on the Grand Tour. And Uverdale Price was one of the very important writers. And then there was another man called Thomas Jones at Hafod. And Hafod was a great landscape park. And Nash did work for both these men. And so he couldn't really escape these ideas that were in the swim. And he also formed a partnership with one of the greatest of all the landscape designers of this period, Humphrey Repton.
Indeed, yes.
So he was absolutely sort of steeped in these picturesque ideas that were so fashionable. And this had a big influence on the design of Regent Street.
How does he come to be the Prince Regent's favourite architect? You say it's not clear, but I mean, they become, very, very closely connected, don't they?
Well, I have to tell you is that he attempts to divorce his first wife, and in our terms, he would have done it. For some reason, the divorce petition, divorce was quite unusual in those days, and I don't quite understand it, but it had to be ratified by the House of Lords. I don't quite know why. Anyway, it wasn't. For some reason, this wasn't ratified, and so he still remained reluctantly married to his first wife, but presumably she must have died, because I think in the late 1790s, he marries again. Yes, I've forgotten her name, but anyway, he does. But this is round about 1798, and suddenly his fortunes improve. And Summerson says that she produced all these children who were mysteriously incubated in some back corner of the Isle of Wight. I mean, I don't know why he says that. I think that's rather mean, because Nash did do very well. And one of the things he did was he bought a little estate on the Isle of Wight at Cowes, and he built himself a castle. I mean, this was part of the picturesque thing. You could do these imaginative buildings which look good in the landscape. They weren't rigorously classical or anything like that. These were things more like scenery. And so anyway, he had Cowes Castle, or East Cowes Castle, I think it was called. So it wasn't all that obscure, a corner of the Isle of Wight. But anyway, Summerson strongly implies that there was something going on. And it's always been thought, there was a rude ballad with caricatures or something, implying that, or saying that the explanation, Nash's rise, was because she was a discarded mistress of the Prince of Wales. But I think that is not proved.
Does Geoffrey Tyke, who is the more recent scholar of Nash, does he have anything to say about the... Sorry, it's rather unfair to put you on the...
No, no, I can tell you, John.
You can. Oh,
I called you out there.
Well,
I mean, he discusses this, but it's unproved, basically.
Yeah, how interesting.
But, I think that Summerson is being slightly naughty and making a story out of it, more than it is. But still, the thing... It's a rum-do. Anyway, Nash does very quickly rise to fame. One of the things he does, this is actually after Regent Street has got going. I mean, the whole Regent Street, the improvement concept. He rebuilds the Brighton Pavilion.
Yes.
For the Prince Regent. That's actually in 1815. But, I mean, this is extraordinary because he does it. And this is a pure Nash, how he looks at things. He takes this building, which was a low classical building by Henry Holland.
Yeah, so it's rather a modest box with a bow at the back. Yeah.
Yes, sort of fine architecture and everything. And it makes it this Indian fantasy with lots of onion domes. And then inside, well, I don't think he's entirely responsible for this, but he must have had a hand in it. It's decorated in the most luscious and lavish style, exotic style, with a lot of chinoiserie, and in the dining room, a chandelier with a huge dragon descending from a ceiling, a very, very tall ceiling.
It's a fantastical building, isn't it? I mean, it is a building created for one of the richest figures in the world, the most powerful figures in the world. At least that's certainly what George IV, the Prince Regent, thinks himself as being.
I think it would be true. He was an extraordinary. Yes, I mean, anyway, we had just beaten Napoleon.
Indeed.
So I suppose, we were on a rise from that point of view.
And I mean, this is important, you've said already, the Prince Regent he loves both building, but also every kind of display, doesn't he? I mean, he's a major patron of these, particularly I think in France, where you basically buy a piece of porcelain, and there are people who will then, and then you will cover it with metalwork and glass and build it into a clock or something like this. I mean, there's
of course, the other thing was that
object
because of the French Revolution, so much furniture, this very, very, very fine French furniture, which was regarded as the best in the world, was suddenly all on the market. Huge quantities because everybody's heads being chopped off. And so, English collectors like George IV, Prince Regent, were just there waiting, to snap it all up, and he couldn't stop shopping.
And I mean, I think it's the most.
He was sent to. He bought this place in Brighton because of his health. He'd been told that the sea bathing. I didn't realize he actually did bathe, but
yes, the sea bathing.
But he did, and he had this bad health because he was so enormously fat. He just couldn't say. He just couldn't. He had all these tastes, all of which he had to satisfy.
Well, the kitchen in the Brighton Pavilion with its palm tree columns, I think, underlines his love of food. But I mean,
he used to go around, but then he was, or quite soon afterwards, he was sort of in a wheelchair because he was very fat and probably gouty, and but he had to keep it as all like a conservatory. It had this central heating. Which was a sort of, another new thing. And it had to be very warm because it had these bad joints. Anyway, that's slightly off the topic.
I was about to say, the thing that summarizes it seems to me always his love of opulence is that he basically takes the entire plate collection of the crown collection of plate and gilds it all. Everything that's silver before is gold plated afterwards.
Yes.
That somehow, and I think that...
Yes, that's very Regency.
And I think what he does architecturally in London, it does have a little bit of an edge of Augustus in Rome, finding it brick and leaving it marble.
Yes.
He wants... There's this idea that he's going to the reason he allows Regent Street to be called Regent Street, I think, is that he has in his mind this idea that he is himself a transforming monarch, that he's turning London into a totally different city. And that is curiously, it is an aesthetic of Regent Street and its associated developments, that they are all stuccoed, aren't they?
Yes, I was going to say, I have to slightly pick you up on that, because Regent Street doesn't begin brick and become marble. It starts brick and becomes stucco.
Exactly.
Which was a material that Nash was very fond of. And the thing about stucco is it's this plaster which coats the front of a building, but it can be made to look like something else because it was scored as though it was ashlar stone, which would be far too expensive. Cut blocks of stone, and then it was painted. I mean, these days people tend to paint it a sort of cream colour, but actually, in Nash's day, it would have been painted a kind of sandy colour to look like stone.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it was a sham. It was very theatrical.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's absolutely true. I'm sure that Nash, in fact, he had a house with a gallery in it, which was immensely swanky. So he shared these tastes of the Prince Regent, but equally he had this amazing ability to create sort of scenic effects.
And we'll come to that. I think in the next half of the podcast, we'll talk about what it's like walking down Regent Street and what he creates.
Yes,
I mean, I suppose it is one of the peculiarities of Regent Street. We talk about it. I mean, you've already mentioned it's what he created is almost entirely gone in the street itself. Regent Street is completely rebuilt into the early 20th century, but it does bind together these ideas of the picturesque in really interesting ways.
Yes. I mean, a huge amount survives around Regents Park, but the essence of this long street, I mean, the essence of Nash's genius is that it's not straight.
And so it's an urban picturesque creation.
It's picturesque because it has to. I mean, that was in a sense a practical thing because it couldn't be straight because of, again, it wasn't like Paris where an absolutist monarch or ruler of another kind could just simply push these avenues through existing urban fabric.
No.
Couldn't do that. Say, George IV or the Prince Regent was actually having to buy up things, So it couldn't be straight because of what Nash could acquire. But in fact, he had an aesthetic solution for it, because he had all these clever things that he could do.
And it's very unusual to have an urban picturesque.
Yes.
And I mean, that's almost the genius of it. It's to work of the picturesque in an urban context. We associate the picturesque with rural settings generally, and this is an urban picturesque.
Yes, that's true. I suppose you could say that, for example, the Royal Crescent in Bath, which overlooks the landscape. So, there are bits of...
that anticipate this.
Yes, and have bits of landscape which are associated with them. But it's not... I mean, Nash is taking these series of urban forms and doing it using that, which I think, which is completely unprecedented. It was just such a genius work of imagination.
Well, we're going to explore what it's like in part 2.
Good.
Excellent. Thank you. Right, Clive. Now, we've made a bit of a mess of trying to explain how Regent Street works, but we can give at least I have. Let's give a flavour of what it's like. I mean, can you perhaps describe the journey into London? Where, I mean, if you started in the circular park at Regent's Park.
Yes, because it is this extraordinary thing. I mean, we have to remember that this was all kind of standing alone, that London hadn't engulfed it then. So you were really going... I mean, it's not very far out of London, obviously, at all. But, I mean, it was a kind of sort of suburb, really. But it's an extraordinary suburb because you have this park, actually landscape not so interesting, but it was going to be full of all these villas which had their own gardens. So you'd have walked through it and it would have been full of flowers and
actually, really interesting. I remember, I think Todd Longstaff-Gowan, the garden designer, he was involved in giving advice, I think, about replanting Regent's Park recently or doing some work there. And he was explaining to me that recently the plantings have tended to be around the railings against the road to block out the roads from the park. But he makes this really interesting point that originally there are roads with railings and wide pavements, but in fact the plantings are sort of in the main bodies of the green areas, so that it becomes a sort of transparent sylvan landscape. Again, in the picturesque tradition, really interesting. And we do tend to plant squares in London with things around the edge.
Yes, of course, that is absolutely true.
To fence things out, and his point is that you're meant to look across it and see these
But as a result, they look very dull now. But of course, it would have been enchanting.
Yes.
In Nash's, And it was the age of the gardenesque, which I think was a Repton expression, who had been Nash's partner, where capability Brown, like these landscapes with big landscape features and, big stretches of sward, of just grass. Yes. Whereas Repton wanted, at least near houses, to have this sort of...
trees, billowing foliage.
But prettier, planted sort of with flowers. Flowers.
I see.
So they were flower beds, they were. in sort of interesting shapes. So, I mean, that's the sort of thing that these villas would have had. The villas weren't built,
Yes.
but it was that sort of very pretty landscape that I think would have been in Nash's mind. But 8 villas were built, not very many survive. You can't really see them. But round the edge of this circular park, there's a circular road, and that is lined with these terraces.
Yes.
And the terraces are designed to look like palaces. And I know, John, we discussed this in Bath, and you were rather down on John the Elder because you thought he was a bit of a nutter and not very competent. But he did. I think I had to get you to admit that he came up with it.
I admit nothing.
Anyway, the idea of linking up these narrow vertical houses, into a block which had end pavilions and a big
pediment
in the middle, which sort of made them look like a palace, was something that was already had already been done quite a little while before. But Nash really sort of made this his own thing, and he designed these palaces covered in stucco. They weren't stone. And he designed them in a variety of slightly contrasting styles, but Sir John Summerson is slightly sniffy about them because they're not sort of, the detail is not, it's not like the architects of the Greek revival, this beautiful, beautiful detail derived directly from Greek sources or anything like that. This is, much more kind of broad brush than that, yes, but it does create, a really fantastic lot of real estate.
Yes, it's cut-price classicism, isn't it?
It's cut-price classicism, but very, very effective. Of course, the Victorians loathed this kind of thing, partly because they didn't like stucco, because they thought it was deceitful.
Yes,
it was hiding the truth. Yes. Pugin was very, very down on stucco, despite living in Ramsgate, which has lots of it. But equally, they didn't like it because they thought Georgian architecture was boring, because it was too repetitive for them. You can't really say that of Nash exactly, but they didn't like it. But anyway, since their time, these have always been regarded as highly desirable. And when Summerson was writing, they would have been practically the ne plus ultra of anything. One of those houses on Regents Park was very thought to be a very good thing indeed.
Well, there is that great revival of interest in Regency taste in the 30s. Gerald Wells.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Others,
Yes, Vogue Regency as Oswald
Lancaster.
Osbert Lancaster. Osbert Lancaster called it. Yes. So, yes, that is absolutely true. And that was spot on. And sort of Quality Street, the Quality Street chocolate tin.
Yes.
Was all that.
And the point is then you come from this park and you enter into, in fact, initially a straight road, don't you, that's running south towards...
Well, this is typical of the thing. There was going to be a circus. I.e. a circular space immediately south of this park. But this is so typical of the story. The contractor only built half of it and then went bust.
Is this man John Burton? I can't remember.
I think John Burton was much of... No, I don't know that it was, but he was one of the characters involved. Was he the father of Decimus Burton? Anyway, who knows? But Nash was equal to this disaster because he kept the bottom half of, made it a crescent, and then the top half became a square, which is, I think it's called Park Square. And that, these are beautiful houses, absolutely marvellous, all with porches with columns and a sort of patch of square separating them. This is quite a busy area of London now, but because it's on the Marylebone Road, right. But it wasn't at the time, as you were just saying earlier. You go into this crescent, and that leads into Portland Place. Portland Place had already been built. That had been built sort of approx 1770 by the Adam brothers. I think it was their undertaking. It was very wide. There was a house called Foley. Lord Foley lived in a house at the bottom. And the new street, Portland Place, couldn't obscure his view. So it was as wide as Foley House was. But that had already been built. And that is really marvellous. And some of the Adams houses are there. And it's interesting, they were also doing this thing of trying to make things look grander than they were, because I noticed as I was walking down the other day that you see houses which look as though they are one big house. But when you look at the entrance, they're actually rather ingeniously concealed. There are actually two entrances. So they're really what looks like one house is really two houses. I mean, both very big, but even so. So this idea of making things look bigger
has a long history.
Yes, and we have this problem in London. We like to live in these very vertical houses, which, of course, look like sort of strings of beans if you don't do something about them. So we're an important place. But then there's a kink where what is now a broadcasting house, the BBC, where the BBC is, and still is, it goes round, and then it enters Regent Street itself. And when he was building Regent Street, Nash had this problem because it wasn't something he could control. He had to get other people to buy to buy into it and to buy plots which they were going to build things on.
Yeah.
And he got a whole lot of people, including, for example, the church commissioners who wanted to build one of their new churches. But all these people, somebody wanted to build a hotel, somebody wanted to build a big house, but they all wanted different things. So it was never going to be very unified. But again, he turned this to
advantage.
And as he goes around this corner, to keep he was so clever at directing your eye. He put this circular church. He gave the church commissioners their space for a church. And it's the circular one with a sort of tall, pointy spire.
That's right.
But because it's circular, I think, the idea is that because it's circular, you don't notice the change of direction so much.
Well, it has no axis, does it?
Yes.
So you can read it from any direction.
Yes, exactly.
As being...
Yes. And I'm not quite sure, I can't relate, it's a while since I've been inside, but I'm not sure that it's not circular inside, is it? Anyway, that's a question mark.
Gosh, yes, I can't remember. I have been in, but I
not,
can't immediately... I mean, the body of the
locked.
church is not. It's just the tower. It's just the western end, isn't
Yes.
it? Yes.
It's not circular all the way around, despite having walked past it the other day. But it was locked. It was locked, so I couldn't go in. I didn't cross the road.
You were just admiring it, practically, from outside.
Well, I was strolling down Regent Street and enjoying it very much. But, of course, from that point, Regent Street, it goes... there's a circle, another circle, Oxford Circus. There's another. I think there's another change of direction at Oxford Circus, and so that's why it's a circle again, because you don't realise that I think that the street is turning slightly east or something like that. But there's a lot of Nash around Regent Street, and there's quite a lot of Nash at the other end. There's not any Nash really in Regent Street itself.
Indeed, because it's totally rebuilt. But as he originally designed it, it is a shopping street, isn't it?
Yes,
and it has a gallery, arcades on each side.
Yes,
so that you can walk up and down in complete, in dryness.
Yes,
and go shopping, and people are astonished. I mean, international visitors write about Regent Street as this extraordinarily elegant, spacious.
I think he did have a French example in mind. I think he was thinking of the Rue de Rivoli in France.
That's right, but it does clearly eclipse all competition.
Yes.
On a scale that nobody has seen before. I mean, the strange thing is it's almost a victim of its own success. I mean, because the new Regent Street is built on its line, but as a much broader street and without these arcades.
No. Well, that's a great sadness. Although there was a problem in the Victorian period of what they described as nuisance.
Yeah,
with the columns, because after the siesta, people would use them to relieve themselves against.
So they were maybe removed deliberately.
Well, I think that was mentioned. I don't know. It's possibly an excuse. I don't know. I don't know how. Of course, the rebuilding of Regent Street it's sort of 1890s Edwardian.
Yeah, and into the early 20th
I don't know whether Nash. I don't. The rebuilding of the quadrant, because as you go down, we have only walked part of the way down this scheme. We must continue. Unfortunately, it was rebuilt with these much bigger buildings of the type that they needed. Everything had inflated in terms of scale by the time Regent Street was rebuilt. And these little, by our standards, Regency, and they were quite tall, but they were, you could make so much more money if you had a bigger building.
Yeah,
and that was it. But they weren't great works of genius, I don't think, these, what replaced Nash. It's a shame. I mean, they're very consistent. They're all built of stone, of course, not stucco like Nash used, but really great architects didn't get involved much, I would say, from looking at it. It's all Baroque. But that slightly elephantine style. But, it's consistent. But we go down Regent Street and we then get to a curve, which is called the quadrant. It's a quadrant of a quarter of a circle. And again, it's to disguise this change of direction. We then get to another circus, Piccadilly Circus. Yeah. And then you look around for where to go because actually you're not expecting to go. You think you might go down Shaftesbury Avenue, but actually you have to go right angles to that. And you go down Lower Regent Street and then on to past this wonderful club in terms of its architectural frontage called the Athenaeum, with a statue of Athena.
Which is built with the Army and Navy Club on the other side of Waterloo Place.
Yes.
That's where Carlton House,
yes,
the Prince Regent's house, had been straddling that square. And then
and then he rebuilds these incredible, these Carlton, called Carlton House Terrace, I think.
It is Carlton House. And
on an epic scale, with a sort of because we're at a level which is much taller than the park, much above the park.
So you're overlooking St James's Park, aren't you?
So they've got a whole sort of substructure.
And those houses...
and those are all still that is all Nash, isn't it?
It is all Nash, and that's the place where I feel you get a sense of... I mean, it's much bigger than the Regent Street frontages, because, of course, it is built out over a falling land.
But, of course, these were also... always, I mean, they were enormous houses, but they were so near Buckingham Palace. They were replacing a palace, but they always had a lot of cachet.
Indeed, it's an important point to make, isn't it? The Prince Regent, when he comes to the throne, he shifts. Carlton House is abandoned, allegedly because there's structural problems, and he begins to rebuild Buckingham House as Buckingham Palace.
Yes.
And of course,
Nash.
Again, I'm about to say, and as we'll come to, the downfall of Nash in a way.
Yes, total disaster
for him. Yeah. But I mean, so if you imagine that Regent Street has dropped down and it has connected Oxford Street, Piccadilly, and the Mall and Pall Mall, all these different streets, all running parallel to one another, east-west. It sort of linked them all together with circuses on the way down. And
for example, the Haymarket Theatre, which has got this great, it's still there, it's got this great classical front, which you can see from one of these cross streets, Charles II Street or something.
And
just round the corner, we've got Trafalgar Square.
And the opera, doesn't Nash also design the Royal Opera House, which was demolished at the bottom of Lower Regent Street?
I've forgotten that.
Which, I mean, every now and again, London does perform astonishing acts of self-harm.
Yes.
That opera house was replaced by, and totally unremarkable, and by today's standards, rather low, high-rise building of absolutely no quality at all, leaving only the shopping arcade.
Yes.
Behind. But as you say, because of that move, I mean, of the palace, you effectively get a square at the bottom of Lower Regent Street rather than a palace, and then you dogleg, if you're walking down, you dogleg left into Trafalgar Square. And we've talked a little bit about this with when we were talking about the National Gallery, that the intention then is to have a Royal Academy building in the form of a temple in the middle of Trafalgar Square, where Nelson's column is.
Yes.
And Nash also makes proposals to try and drive a street up to the British Museum, which has been reconstructed by Smirke at exactly this moment, in the 1810s, sort of linking together all these national institutions. And when I talked before about, Augustus, and Rome, there is that sort of sense that London is trying to, as the capital of the most powerful empire in the world, which has just beaten Napoleon after 1815, that it's sort of completely reconfiguring itself with all these institutions and buildings that mark it out as a great cultural centre and capital. It's a really...
And also it was growing at a terrific rate, wasn't it?
It is.
Because of the commercial activity and because of London, all the activity of the city and the London docks and so on. And so a lot had to be accommodated.
I think that's exactly right, and it is. I mean, this is the moment where the British feel so arrogantly confident of their own superiority. They have beaten Napoleon, and the Prince Regent himself. I mean, his delight in French objects. I mean, he not only has the money, but there's something quite vainglorious about his interest in French things, because it shows both that he's escaped revolution,
yes,
and also that these are the people. He's sort of appropriated the taste of the people he's just beaten.
Yes, but of course you get that in Apsley House, which was owned by the Duke of Wellington, which has this colossal statue of Napoleon.
By Canova.
I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, it was something that no English person could have, possibly the Duke of Wellington, but I mean, the idea of having a huge statue of yourself naked, in the Greek style, is not something an Englishman would have probably chosen to have done.
But how delicious to get your enemy
to get your nude. Yes. I mean, it's his moment of total vanity and glory. Is an ornament for your stair hall.
Well, I did at Stratfield say there are the documents relating to the installation of that statue, which is an afterthought, and it's extraordinary because they have to strengthen the basement of the building, and then it's brought down Piccadilly in this enormous carriage cart.
Gosh, can you imagine?
I mean, it's a huge thing to move. Anyway, that's by the by. That's absolutely yes. It's worth saying, isn't it, something about Buckingham House and Buckingham Palace, because that does become the downfall of Nash. I mean, he's become so closely associated with the Prince Regent through this project, through the Brighton Pavilion, and then this move to Buckingham Palace, he designs the successor building, doesn't he?
Well, Nash was born in 1752, and the Prince Regent, or George IV as he's become, was born in 1762. So the Prince Regent was a decade younger than Nash, but he wasn't in great shape. Poor old Nash was very old by this time. I mean, I think by the time he starts in Buckingham Palace, he was in his 70s. I mean, he was obviously a man of great energy, but he was clearly sort of half wanting to put his feet up a bit because he didn't pay attention as much as he should have done. And this was a project that, being funded from the public purse, had all these committees looking at it, and I don't think it's entirely Nash's fault, because the Prince Regent, I keep calling him Prince Regent, he's now George IV. But George IV was such an extravagant man who kept on changing his mind.
And we should just say, for people who are not familiar with this, of course, he's Prince Regent because his father, George III, with whom he doesn't get on at all, is mad towards the end of his life. And so he can't become king because George III is still alive. And it's when his father dies that he becomes George IV.
Yes, and it's from the sort of roundabout the late 1790s, isn't it, that he has to assume his father's duties. And then, was it about 1810 that the regency actually starts? Anyway, was it?
I'm not going to give a date, but...
I'm going to tell you that he was crowned, or I'm going to tell everybody that he was crowned in 1820, wasn't he? And then he dies in 1830. So Buckingham Palace was Nash, born in 52, he was late 60s when George IV was crowned. And so this is he was a pretty old chap by the time he was doing this, and he got it all wrong. It was pretty terrible what he did. One of the things he did, which was possibly a good thing, was to have the arch in the middle of it. Was it the arch from Marble Arch,
which is then moved.
And so that was a French thing. It was like the Arch of Triomphe, except on a rather diddy scale.
And it's also part of the rebuilding.
And that was going to stand
in the forecourt.
And I suppose that on ceremonial occasions, soldiers and things could have gone through it. It's much smaller than the Arch of Triumph, isn't it?
It is much smaller, but it has that quality.
Yes,
it?
It's the same thought.
It's the same thought. But I mean, basically, Parliament absolutely, takes him to task, doesn't it? There are parliamentary committees, and he is ruined, in this very cruel way, as Parliament later does to Charles Barry. It basically just, the Houses of Parliament rebuilt them after the fire. Basically, all these people are terrier-like.
They're in this mill.
And they demonstrate...
The ground fine.
Well, they demonstrate that it's hopelessly mismanaged financially, and they basically, punish him, don't they? And he retires from the whole thing.
Yes, George IV was always getting into trouble over money.
Yes.
And so there's no surprise there. And Nash wasn't the man for the job. But that wasn't where his genius lay. It lay in these great visions of town planning. And he was completely original.
And his country...
I think it's true to say. I don't think anybody had done this before.
Well, though it's interesting you do mention Bath, because Bath, the Woods' work at Bath, it does have a resonance of it, doesn't it? I mean, that idea of linking streets together, circuses, crescents. I
suppose but that's more akin to the great estates and what the great estates had been doing, who had, before Nash, been laying out London with these, typically squares and streets and...
Yes, I know.
Well, there are other architectural forms much in London. I don't know.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, he's clearly, again, we've talked about this before, architects are often as great as the canvases they're given. And Nash, in a way, through his connection with the Prince Regent, is given this extraordinary canvas of being able to do this. And it requires an act of Parliament to get...
But I suppose his canvas, he made the canvas up. I mean, he did have the opportunity, but not everybody would have seen it as a canvas. Some people, because there were competing schemes for Regents Park, and the office of Woods and Forests just wanted to extend London in squares, just as it had been all the time. Just more squares.
Whereas he imposed a kind of overarching logic on it, and was then.
But there's an incredibly original vision of creating this. I'm sort of astounded by the vision of this garden suburb, which wasn't actually built, but to have the idea of it, that was a completely new way of doing stuff.
It's a great canvas, but your point is correctly that he somehow makes the canvas.
Yes.
And it's also indicative of that. I mean, the Pall Mall itself, the way that, they encourage that, he's building it, but it's somehow a collective effort and Pall Mall is a very good example where they want to have the Woods and Forests want to encourage clubs buildings to be built there because they want really grand buildings along Pall Mall, and the result is indeed this line of clubs: the Army and Navy, the Athenaeum, the Travellers, the Reform. All this is going up in the aftermath of this great redevelopment. They're all very big, very grand buildings, and Nash is involved, in the Army and Navy Club, and in fact behaves disgracefully over it because the Athenaeum is being built opposite, and he double crosses Decimus Burton, who's designing that. But there is this sense that institutions
probably forgot.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think he comes across quite complicated.
Well, he was a showman. He was a showman, really. I mean, he was like a sort of actor-manager. He was making it all happen. And I don't think he was too fussed about the detail.
And you're quite right, because we need to end on a positive note. So we must admire him.
We must have. Well, he's absolutely fascinating and well worth a pod on his own, because he was
such an.
So, I mean, we've only just touched the surface of him. So he was an extraordinary man. Well,
we must draw this episode to a close. Do visit our website, www.wipeonpod.
And give us a star rating if you feel like it. If you feel so. I'm just trying to remember all the things we've got to say, John, because we usually don't manage it. You can find bonus material on the website. And I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to put a plan. I'm going to take the plan from Summerson's wonderful book, because this is a very helpful plan which shows the development. I'm going to put that on the website so that people can work out what we've been talking about.
Deeply confusing attempt to describe the topography of London earlier on.
No, you did brilliantly, John. But next week, I think, John, is your choice of place.
Indeed, we're going to be looking at Salisbury and the cathedral and medieval
one of the greatest of all British cathedrals.
Look forward to it.
See you then.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.